Hello, and welcome to Charisms for Catholics. My name is Jill Simons, and I'm the Executive Director at Many Parts Ministries, where we equip the body of Christ by helping people learn about and discern their charisms, which is really another word for spiritual gifts. When you discern your charisms, you're able to see how the Holy Spirit is already active in your life and where He is inviting you to further build the church. Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Charisms for Catholics podcast. Today, we're back to our series talking about saints for the different charisms. And so today we're going to be talking about the charism of leadership, which is one that is one of my primaries. I bring it up a lot when I give examples. And so I'm so excited to have examples of specific saints to point to. And this is a great time to point out that there are a lot of saints that lead, but they're not necessarily leading primarily from a place of leadership. It might be out of a different charism that they are inspiring people at a really widespread level. So the saints that we've picked for today are really focused on that specific charism of leadership in a way where it's about the leadership. So once again, I have my employee with me, Theresa Zoe Williams, who is our resident saint expert and just a beautiful mind around what it is that's really acting in these lives of the saints. So Theresa, thanks so much for being here with me today.
Hey, Jill, thank you so much for having me again. I love doing this with you.
So today we're talking about leadership. So who are we starting with for our first leadership saint?
Oh, one of my absolute favorites. And at the time of recording, his feast day is about to come up. So I'm really excited about him. Saint Ignatius of Loyola. Just a really lovely person and lovely example of leadership and background on him so you understand. He got the initial gang of guys together that formed the Jesuits. He was the spearhead of all of that, and it was at college or university and got them all together, and even the reluctant St. Francis Xavier, and he formed the Jesuits. It was under his ideas that they formed this community. He was the spearhead of the whole entire thing. And so then also he was the superior general of the Jesuits. So he led them in their formation, in their way of life, in what they were going to do with their life. He decided who would and would not go on missions or what they were going to do and where they were going to go and all of that. It was all under Ignatius's vision that they did this. And something really cool, St. Francis Xavier trusted Ignatius so much that he wouldn't tell him when he desired to go to the missions. He thought that was prideful to say, I want to do this, because he trusted Ignatius so much. And so at first, St. Francis was passed over for the missions. He didn't get to go. And then through a series of events, the person who was sent was unable to go anymore. And Ignatius chose Francis to take his place. And Francis was like, oh, good. I've always wanted to do this. This is what my heart's really where it's been. And Ignatius was like, you can tell me things. Like, you're allowed to like tell me your desires. That helps me know what to do with you. And Francis was very humbled and basically apologized for not trusting him enough with his desires to know what would be good and not good for him. But Francis just didn't want to mess up, basically. And Ignatius told him that's okay. Trusting each other is okay. And trusting in his leadership charism is okay because he knows what he's doing. And trusting him actually helps him more fully lead. So I love that story because they were such good pals. And Francis Xavier was like the reluctant Jesuit, and then he was reluctant in everything. It wasn't just St. Ignatius's leadership charism was so strong that he could lead even through these difficulties, which I've always found very inspiring and very uplifting, because I'm a lot like Francis Xavier, and I had a spiritual director once who was a lot more like Ignatius, which was great because I wouldn't tell her my desires, and then she was like, let's do the spiritual exercises. I think that's a good next step for you. Oh, good. I really wanted to do them, but I didn't want to say anything.
Yeah.
Was like pride and I was overstepping where I should be. She was in very similar conversation where she was like, no, if you tell me your desires, we can work through that and see where they're coming from, discern what would be good and not good for you and why you have these desires in the first place. But we can't do that if you don't speak to me.
Yeah, that's such a great story in the context just of charisms in general, because that I think that's a lot of people's fear with putting their charisms forward and saying, these are my charisms and stuff, is that there's like an inherent pride in that. But
Right.
also having a leadership charism like Ignatius, I'm like, I can't read your mind. Like the
Yeah.
leadership gives me the ability to like place you, but I can't read hearts inherently with this charism. So
Right.
if you can give me something to work with, that gives us so much more space to explore what's possible for you. So that's awesome.
Exactly. Yeah. It was a great moment for me personally, and then in my love for these two saints. And I'll just shout out to my husband real fast. Saint Ignatius is our patron saint of our relationship because we met for our first date 3 hours away from where each of us lived in the middle. So we lived about 6 hours apart. We met in the middle. It was St. Ignatius's feast day on the day that we met. And I stopped at a rest stop along the way and just said a prayer to St. Ignatius. I was like, I'm meeting a person that I don't really know. No one's coming with me. I'm going to a place I've never been. Please be with me and make sure that things go okay. And he
Mhm.
did. And so he's been the patron saint of our relationship. And
I
I
love
still think his leadership charism leads us on because every year we celebrate like our first date. And I just remember we always give thanks to St. Ignatius for pulling us safely through what could
that.
have been a very messy situation. It wasn't the brightest of ideas of either of ours. I do not recommend this. This is like coming from personal experience. I do not recommend doing this. I really trusted St. Ignatius to keep me safe, and he did. And he's always been there for me and for us. So even now, like seeing through his intercession as a saint, his leadership charism still plays a major part. And that's really cool to see because up until now, we've seen all of the examples from their life when they've used their charism. But for in a very profound and personal way, Ignatius uses his leadership charism with me now. And I have to trust him still, that he's still going to lead me the way that I need to be led. I'm getting the goosebumps. I can feel him here. He's just a
That's
very,
awesome.
I just love him very much. I'm very indebted to him, very much looking forward to meeting him face to face someday. So,
Yeah, that is definitely what struck me as you were sharing, because so many people, even just maybe that don't have a personal devotion, use the Ignatian exercises. And this is literally like leading you through a spiritual process. And that made me start thinking of all the other saints we've talked about, like people still playing St. Hildegard's music
right.
and people reading the writing of the saints that we talked about for writing and things like that, where this really does, in its supernatural element, transcend or can transcend the life of the individual person.
Yes. Yes. It's just to bring up somebody else really quickly. Saint Therese always said, when I get to heaven, I will let fall a shower of roses. Like she knew that her work wouldn't stop just because
Yeah.
she died. And worshiping is all about being in communion with each other. And so these saints vow to do that for us still when they go to heaven.
Ah,
I love it. It's just, I love our
awesome.
spiritual life. I love the communion of saints. I just love that this connection that God gives us very physically to each other and spiritually to each other.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, who is our next saint for leadership that we have for this week?
Yes. Another really intense one, Saint Joan of Arc. Now, she had the leadership charism uh, very obviously in how she led military campaigns. She was able to lead troops and troops of people in good military campaigns. Like they weren't half baked, they were very thoughtful, they were very intricate and very smart plans of attack. And she dedicated all of it to God, right? Like she wouldn't have done this if she hadn't had visions of what is it, Margaret of Antioch and Catherine and
It might
Michael. She wouldn't have even gone down this path if they hadn't egged her onto it, invited her into it. And here she had this great charism for leadership that could have been wasted otherwise in her time and her station in life and all of that. But yet she was able to use it in such a big way. And it did get her into trouble, of course, as we saw. Honestly, dying is the worst thing that can happen. And that's not too terrible because we know that we live on beyond this. I was just writing about a different saint the other day, and I was like, she looked them in the eyes and said, "Do your worst," and they did. They killed her. This is on my Substack, but the thing is, it's not really that bad. If you We should do what we can to preserve our lives, but and we'll talk about this guy next, but when it's time to face the truth and stand up for that truth, nothing stands in your way, not even death. And I love that about St. Joan of Arc, that she led until her last breath. She was up there singing the praises of God from the pyre that she's being burned on and holding the crucifix. And just what a beautiful example of, this isn't all there is, till there's so much more to come. And if you're willing to waste my earthly life like this, I'm willing to spend my eternal life serving. And she was so young too. She was 14 when she got the visions from the saints. Died at 19.
I want to say that's correct. Yeah. Actually, in a very cool just confluence of events, our episode of the podcast next week is going to be all about Saint Joan of Arc with a guest who is writing a book about her right now. We're pulling out more about the evolution of identity in her life. And so we're going to get to go like in an awesome deep dive into Joan of Arc next week,
That's fantastic.
because she is such a great exemplar of the things that we're talking about, just with charisms and growth in identity in
Mhm.
general.
She's a great one for the identity quotient, just looking at
Yes.
the progression of her life. Oh, I'm so excited for that. I can't wait to listen to
Yes.
that. You better all
Yeah.
listen to it too. It'll be fantastic. Much better than I'm doing right now. So,
It is. There's great information in that podcast too about specifically like the inspiration aspect of
mm,
leadership, a
mm,
huge part of her story. So I'm excited to share that with you guys. And
that's
we have
great.
one more
Yes.
saint for leadership
One more
today.
saint for today, and
It
that
is
is
the
Saint
OG.
Peter. Yeah, the OG, Saint Peter. Gosh, there's so much to say about Saint Peter that I don't know that this will even come close to being good enough. He formed tons of people in the faith, just being an apostle, getting to go out and do all of that. He just thousands of people. You can look at just the Pentecost account and see how many people that he evangelized and he formed in the faith right then and there. But he also helped form all of the other apostles. We hear all Peter, James, and John, Peter, James, and John, Peter, James, and John. Those were the inner three. Those were the ones that went back to the other apostles and said, "This is what Jesus is showing us. This is what he means. This is what we need to do now." And I love Peter. My first son is Peter. My only son is Peter, because I love St. Peter so much. His temperament got in the way sometimes, and then he had to rely on grace and rely on the charisms he was given and really pull himself out of the muck and try again. And he did repeatedly. Never gave up. He never gave in to despair despite failing greatly at some points. And in his later life, like him and St. Paul would get into it. There's plenty of their back and forth that we know about. And he never spared over it. He led still. And St. Paul even would talk about how Peter leads. So it's not just that we can assume that he led. St. Paul, the other leader of the early church, we have the Petrine and the Pauline parts of the pontificate. They're really two sides of the same coin. But even Paul affirms Peter's leadership status. And that's a really cool thing, to be entrusted with, too, to set up the whole church. Jesus just said, build a church. He didn't leave some blueprints for it, and that he left it to Peter, and Peter above all of the apostles to do it too. And so it was up to Peter's leadership to decide how this would be formed, how it would take place, what everybody's roles would be, while also not being bossy, which is something Peter struggled with. And that's a lot of what Paul called him out about. But
Yes.
again, like when Peter knew it was time to give up his life, when he knew it was time to come out of hiding, he went back to Rome. And what happened in Rome? He was imprisoned and then he was murdered. But he knew it was time because he had spent time hiding and he had spent time trying to preserve his life and trying these other ways. And then he came to face the fact that this was what was asked of him, and he did that without question. And that
Yeah.
takes a lot of leadership. It really showed the church how to move on too, because when you have someone that looms as large as Peter, looms as large as Paul, that's really hard to move on from. I was just listening to the Hamilton soundtrack again yesterday.
That was like when you said that, I was like, "Oh, teach them how to say goodbye."
Say goodbye. And that's really, he's not a saint, but Washington obviously had the leadership. But like in Hamilton, they say Washington wants the country to learn how to move on without him and how to become stable without him. That's what Peter wanted for the
Yeah.
church too, to be stable without him. Even though it says in the gospel, upon this rock, Peter, I build my church. He needs it to be a rock forever, but Peter can't live forever. So what do
Yeah.
you do? How do you plan for that? And that's really what he did. And I think that's the best example of his leadership charism, just in how he formed the early church, set up the system for us as much as possible, and taught us how to move on from him.
Yeah.
Just a really incredible gift to give the church, to
Yeah.
not rely, like, how devastated was everyone when Jesus died? He's it. And if you were just putting your faith in Jesus being alive and conquering, you got let down big time. But Peter didn't. He knew better, even though he denied Jesus. He knew that the glory comes after. And so he
Yeah.
lived that way from then on out, and he taught the church how to live that way.
Mhm.
And he's in my inner sanctum of saints. He's
Yeah.
very special to
Yep.
me.
So have a child named Peter. Both of
Yeah.
our oldest are Peter. And I think that it's so beautiful in the story of Peter how he also didn't let the historical mistakes or the historical shortcomings disqualify him in his own mind from
Yes.
moving into what it is that God had for him to do. Because I think that is one of the big temptations
Mhm.
that there is for people who feel like there is maybe a overwhelming or a big calling on their life, is to be able to point to the past and say, look, I've done this and that and the other thing, and not even to whether or not it's been confessed or not, to feel like even after the slate is wiped clean and you're back in a state of grace and stuff like that, to feel like those things still are invalidating to the call that you've received. And we see such a clear answer to that in the life of Peter, the way that he interacts with Christ over the charcoal fire and things like that after the resurrection, and the call still coming despite the shortcomings.
Yes. He's just a perfect example of being imperfect and still being usable by God and lovable by God, which is, I get along with Peter well. I have such a soft spot for him because I struggle with those things very much. I struggle with knowing that I'm enough, even with my shortcomings, and knowing that I'm still capable of being loved, of loving, of being helpful despite everything.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for being here with us today. It was so fun to go through the leadership saints. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another set of saints for a new charism, and we'll be continuing on with this series until we've done them all, until we've gotten to the beginning of the alphabet in this case, because we're working backwards. But I hope that you keep tuning in and discovering more saints that give you great insight in how to live your unique charisms. We'll see you next week. Thanks so much for joining us on today's episode of Charisms for Catholics. If you would like to learn more about your charisms or begin your own discernment journey, head to our website at manypartsministries.com, where you can download our free PDF guide to all 24 charisms and also begin your own journey by taking our charism assessment.